Thank you for the day, for the time that you've given us. Pray that our study of your word as it applies to economics will be fruitful and useful for us in our day-to-day. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. So here we are in week 4 of Bedrock economics, biblical economics, if you will. This is a talk that many of you all, the vast number that are in here. Most of you have probably heard this talk before on an expanded basis in the Mars presentations. Honest money, and we will be applying the concepts of value and incentives here as we discuss money. Just a quick review of where we've been. All human action is economic. Our actions demonstrate our values, and by imputing value to the objects of our actions. At regeneration, God changes our values. So we can say that our regeneration is an economic event. Incentives, that they are intended to affect our values. We provide incentives for others to act. Think about advertising is incentive for other people. You're trying to change their values by presenting incentives. Laws are incentives. We saw that. We reviewed that. God's laws, man's laws, they're all incentives to change our behavior. The Bible has many incentives, as do men's laws. How believable is the incentivizer? It's a measure of our faith. If we believe the incentives that are put in front of us, we're exhibiting faith. So our faith is an economic activity as well, in that we are exhibiting a belief in who it is that's providing these incentives. We believe that God will act on His promises. We believe that about Rita the meter maid. We should certainly believe that about God. So that's a quick review of where we've been. No more review on the tithe. We buried that one last time. So, what is money? Money, as the classic definition of what is money, is something used as a medium of exchange. To understand the implications of that, we have to start by understanding what the most primitive form of an economy is. What's known as a subsistence economy. This is where you simply eat. We need to know what a subsistence economy is, how it develops into a barter economy, and how that then develops into and morphs into a money economy. Adam and Eve were banished from the garden. We all know the story, and that they were forced to eat by the sweat of their brow. Genesis 3:19 and 23, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. Because from it you were taken, and you were dust, and to dust you shall return. Therefore, God sent him out of the garden. We all know that story. And Adam's first economy was just that, a subsistence economy. He lived because he worked. He made food, he gathered food, he grew food, and he subsisted by the sweat of his brow. He traded his time and his labor, applied it to nature for harvesting and creation of food. Remember when we talked about economic goods, we need time, we need nature, and we need labor. Those are the three components of a good. And we could say that food is a good. So Adam was living simply a simple subsistence living. It eventually became a shared family economy, and the family relied only on itself for its subsistence. It was hard. If your crop failed or your hunt failed, you starved. Not much economic activity going on in a subsistence economy. You do have people working to trade a less satisfactory state of being for a more satisfactory state of affairs, which was one of our discussions about value and economic action. But there's really not much sophistication in a subsistence economy. Now, over time, we see that one family grows into numerous families, and they naturally began to trade amongst themselves. That is, they bartered the things that they made or grew. Maybe a family made a better stick for poking a hole in the ground to make to plant their seeds. Maybe it was a better way of making a spear for hunting animals. But in any event, they started to barter amongst themselves. Hey, I'll trade you a couple bushels of corn for that spear, and that's the essence of barter. I think we all understand barter. As we get more and more people, you will inevitably see a division of labor occur. People will specialize in the things that they're best at. And division of labor is a good thing. God gifts people in different ways. And that's for just this reason, so that we can be the most effective. We can take dominion because we're very good at doing what we do, and we can do that and trade that for other things that people do well. We probably saw some specialization early with Cain and Abel, with the sacrifices of grain and firstlings. Perhaps Cain was a better farmer and Abel was a better herdsman. The problem wasn't what they brought. The problem was the manner or the attitude that Cain brought it in. But we see specialization explicitly in the Bible in a few verses after that. Genesis 4:19, we read, Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, the name of the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Okay, so we have our first herdsman. Not the first herdsman, but the first talk about a herdsman. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play lyre and pipe. So we have the first entertainer. And as for Zillah, she gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. He was the village smithy, right? Under the spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. So Tubal-Cain, the first smith. We have specialization being talked about here. So division of labor, this is a good thing. The problem with barter economies, of course, always runs into that they rely on coincidence. It's you have to find somebody who wants what you have, and you have to want what they have in order to barter. It's called the coincidence of wants, and it's a real problem in barter economies. How do you find the guy who has what you want? How does he find you because you have what he wants? Let's pretend that Tubal-Cain Smith, right, our village smithy, he's a real fan of artichokes. This is the example I always use, the artichokes. And there's an artichoke growing family over the hill. So he goes over the hill to trade some of his bronze implements for artichokes. But the artichoke people don't want any of the things that he's making out of bronze. So how does he get the artichokes? He has 2 choices. He either does without the artichokes or he has to grow his own. Now, he's a smith. He's not a good farmer. He's good at making bronze and forged instruments. He's not good at growing. So it would be inefficient for him to grow the artichokes. So there's a problem. Locating all the people that he needs to trade with for all the things that he wants is too inconvenient. He'll probably just stay at home. He'll probably do the artichoke farming, but he'll be doing it inefficiently. Instead of spending time under the spreading chestnut tree, making his bronze instruments. It's not the best use of his time. He's a smith. He's very good at smithing, but not so good at artichoke growing. Barter economies impede productivity of the society in general because people are doing things that they shouldn't necessarily do. Now we have Tubal-Cain growing artichokes when he'd be better off spending his time at the forge. And so this is how we transition from barter economies, just trading what we have, into money. Tubal-Cain could trade his bronze, suppose he could trade his bronze instrument for something that the artichoke growers do want. Okay, so he could trade now his spearheads for, who knows, maybe pumpkins, and the artichoke people don't grow pumpkins. He could then trade that pumpkin for the artichokes. And then he could satisfy his economic desire, even though it was done indirectly. He didn't trade his spearhead for the artichokes. He's traded his spearhead for the pumpkin, and then he traded the pumpkin for the artichoke. It's in between. It's intermediate. So he's going to be on the lookout for something that the artichoke growers want, and actually anything that the artichoke growers want, be it pumpkins or silver or who knows what. He wants to find the commodity that anybody might want. Not just the artichoke growers, he's going to try to find that commodity that anybody might want. And that is the commodity with the most desirability. It's the commodity that everyone wants, and that could be used for the indirect exchange. It would be a medium of exchange, which was our definition of money. Money is a medium of exchange, medium, in between, intermediate. It's a medium. Now, money is, this is a better definition of what money truly is. Money is the most marketable or saleable or tradable commodity in an economy. That's just what it is. It's the thing that everybody will trade for. That's what money is. Because it's the most marketable commodity in an economy, all the other items and services in that economy are priced in terms of that commodity. If it would be spearheads, you'd say, okay, I could buy this coffee cup for half a spearhead, right? That's how we price this commodity. Everything is priced in terms of the money, whatever that money might be. So in economic terms, we call that pricing. And because all the economic activity gets priced in terms of money, whatever that money might be, sometimes we confuse money with wealth. We say a wealthy person has a lot of money. Is that true? Well, yeah, but is the money the wealth, or is what the money can buy the wealth? Wealth is priced just like a commodity. I said this was priced, this is a half a spearhead for this cup of coffee, right? Wealth is priced in money. You could price your wealth in spearheads or silver or gold or Federal Reserve notes, dollars. But wealth and money are not necessarily the same things. It's important to understand. The idea of monies being the most tradable commodity in an economy presupposes that there's trading going on, that there's somebody to trade with. We talked about the natural progression as families grow, as there are more and more people, there's more and more trade. So that's a presupposition for the use of money. If there's no trading going on in an economy, there's no need for money. If you lived on an island like Robinson Crusoe, and you're all by yourself, you don't need money. There's no need for money. There's no need for what we consider money in terms. Joel.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe. Whenever I think of economies, I'm always thinking of Robinson Crusoe.
It's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
The story of Robinson Crusoe.
It seems like that clarifies things. What I'm wondering is, and I would know this, but I mean, is Robinson Crusoe taught modern economic theory, modern economic classes? Because in terms of a classic story, I don't know of any single event or piece of literature or whatever that explains economics like Robinson Crusoe does. I'm just wondering if it's only discussed like in Christian circles.
It comes up almost always to be dismissed as being irrelevant because we don't live that way. But a lot of arguments in science, in mathematics, even in social sciences, a lot of teaching is done by going to the extremes. Go to extremely small or go to extremely large with your numbers, with your mathematics, to see does this formula make any sense? Does it make any sense out here where it's extremely large, or does it make any sense here where it's extremely small? Same with science, and so to me, the Robinson Crusoe economics is a social science, and so for me, the Robinson Crusoe is the extremely small. It's the smallest of economies. It's a subsistence economy. Is there any need for money? To try to explain money without understanding Robinson Crusoe doesn't make sense. We have to understand what money is. It's that most marketable, tradable commodity. It's that thing that people impute value to. Remember we talked about, in our first lessons, we talked about we give things value by the action that we take to get those things. If Robinson Crusoe he knows he's going to be stranded on this island all by himself, the ship is sinking. He has a couple of, maybe an hour to go back and forth to the sinking ship to get some things off. Is he going to go to the captain's locker and pull out a cask or a little chest of money, of silver or gold coins? No. Why? It doesn't do him any good on the island. What's he going to do with gold or silver coins? Nothing, because nobody wants them. You can't eat them, you can't farm with them, you can't do anything with them. It doesn't make any sense. What does he need? He needs knives, he needs barrels, he needs rope, he needs tools. He needs the things that he's going to use to make food, to build housing and shelter. The money isn't going to do any of that for him. And so it's vital to understand how money works. And it works just like we talked about in the very first week when we talked about imputation. If you don't impute value to it, it doesn't have value. Jack.
Isn't gold kind of inherently valuable to people? Like people, I mean, gold is gold. It seems like
people have an attraction to it.
They have an attraction to it, and it seems like people would just go for gold just to have it or something. I mean, I don't know. The Bible talks about gold too sometimes.
Sure does.
Very
early in Genesis, it talks about the land of Havilah, where the gold was good, where the gold is good. And gold is important, and we're going to see that as we get into talking about the uses of money in transactions and in trade. Gold's very good,
And it's good because it's scarce, but it's good because there's social interaction going on.
right now what I'm getting at is, what is money? I'm trying to get to first, what is money?
And whether or not money's going to have value and how people put value to money.
I mean, I'm talking about like even back in the day. Why did we put value on gold?
Because it was scarce.
Right.
Because you can't just make it up.
Because nobody can just flip a switch and have gold pop out of a machine. You can't mix two things together and come up with gold. Joel.
But isn't it true there are other things that are scarce, but...
We'll get to these.
Okay.
We'll get to these.
The other things are scarce, but they don't have the value of gold has.
Correct.
It's useful.
Yes.
It's scarce and useful.
Toby.
If you're going to talk about this later, just wave me off. But I wanted to touch base about, or talk about income. In other words, suppose there's a guy that has a truck and a trailer, and he drives produce around for farmers. They pay him in corn and whatever, they're bartering.
Mm-hmm.
But if that truck driver decides he wants Federal Reserve notes, now all of a sudden, oh, that's income.
Yes.
In some people's eyes, that's income.
Yes. We're getting into a discussion about taxes and what's taxable and what's not. If you were to grow all your own food and not have any trade with anybody in Federal Reserve notes, would you have income that's taxable to the government? The answer is no, not the way they define it. Would you have an increase? Yes, you have an increase. But you don't have an increase in terms of what the government is taxing.
Converting things into their currency, into their money, makes that taxable transaction. There's even an argument about whether turning your labor into money is an increase, or if you're simply trading one thing for another. If you have, in your barter example, and we're off on a bunny trail here, but in your barter example, if you trade pumpkins for corn, right, you don't necessarily have you don't have a taxable transaction. You don't have an increase. If you trade a bushel of corn for a bushel of corn, you don't have an increase. If that bushel of corn is worth an hour's worth of your work, and you trade an hour's worth of your work for the bushel of corn, do you have an increase? Not if they're exactly equal. There's a real question to say, is your hourly income even income? No, it's a wage because you've traded something for something of equal value. So your increase is only that if you bought this for $1 and tomorrow you sold it for $2, you have an increase. If you bought this for $1 and sold it tomorrow for $1, you don't have an increase. You're just standing still. So, but that's a whole nother economic issue. Yeah. So anyway, Robinson Crusoe, we understand. But in normal economies, not a Robinson Crusoe economy, money is absolutely vital to the division of labor. Remember, we were talking about different people specialize in different things. So, you need money because you want to be able to trade your time and services for the money so that you can trade that money, which is the most desirable commodity in the economy, for other goods and services. There's no need to rely on the coincidence of wants. You don't have to find somebody that's making artichokes, growing artichokes, and trading your spearheads for the artichokes. You know, you can sell your spearheads for money and everybody will accept the money. It's vital, and it's a social event. Understand, it's only in a society where we have lots of people interacting one with another that we need money. It's a social event. That's why economics is a social event. And why the other thing is, as we talked about in that first week when we talked about imputation and value, it's something that's going on in your head is what is valuable. That makes it social, not something you can model. You can't put this down on an Excel spreadsheet and get it figured out time and time again. Money economy was referred to in Genesis 17:12 when it was talking about circumcision. Every male among you is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. A servant born in the house or is bought with money from a foreigner who's not your descendant. So there's the first use of the word money in the Bible. But it's early. It's in Genesis 17. Understanding money is terrifically important to understanding how a modern economy works. So we all have our heads around the idea of what money is. All right. So now we need to understand the importance of the integrity of the money, the reliability of the money, that we understand what the money is. We're all imputing value to the gold or silver. We're all imputing value to the spearheads, whatever that is. Do we understand what that spearhead is? Is it the same each and every time? Is the gold coin the same each and every time? If society loses its confidence in the money won't work. It doesn't serve as money. It's the most marketable commodity, but it's only marketable because it's valued. And remember, value is an imputation event. It's something that we give to it. If we don't think it's valuable anymore, it's not. So we're right back to imputation. If we lose the confidence, if we lost faith in the money, it doesn't have any value. So there's incentive there to use it because we have faith in it, right? And because it's reliable. And we are taking that faith and we are using that to impute value to it. So money is a confluence of incentive and imputation value. Now, if money was suddenly withdrawn from an economy, we would be in deep water. We would be in real trouble. How do you buy your food? How do you buy your gasoline? How do you heat your house? How do you whatever? You're in real trouble if money fails. So what would happen is right away you'd be out there planting a garden, but you aren't going to eat tomorrow if you're just planting it today. We would be very depressed. We would be very hampered if we didn't have money, and we would be relying on barter. We would be trying to trade what we have for what people have put aside that we can use to survive. Two good examples of this, both happened more or less at the same time. the U.S. Great Depression and Weimar Germany, and it's opposites. In the U.S. Depression, during the U.S. Depression, the money more or less disappeared. We went through an extraordinarily deflationary event. The money wasn't in the banks. There was no money. And so while prices were very, very, very low, what we call low prices, nobody had any money, so you couldn't buy anything. And in Weimar Germany, they printed so much that the money became worthless. And so you couldn't, people were literally, in Weimar Germany in the 1920s, early 1920s, this was after World War I, Germany decided to print so much money that every half hour, the waiters in a restaurant would jump up on the table and yell what the new prices were. That's how fast the prices were changing. Every half an hour, they would change the prices. People were burning their money because they got more value out of the heat coming from the paper than what they could spend it for. People, the wives were going to the factories where the men were working. They would go at lunchtime because the men were getting paid twice a day. They would go with baskets. The husbands would dump all this paper money into it, and the wives would run to the store and try to buy something before the prices changed. In 1918, at the end of the war, a German mark was worth a quarter, 25 cents, 4 German marks for $1. By 1923, it was 4 trillion German marks to $1. It became worthless. And so their economy fell apart, and people starved to death because money didn't work. And so people didn't know how to trade one with another. They lived in cities. They weren't farmers anymore. Not all of them. Too many people lived in the cities. So what we can see is that the integrity of the money is vitally important for society to work. So we've defined the concept of money, what kinds of commodities work as money, and now we're getting to your thing on gold, Shaq. Originally, while gold and silver have best fit these requirements for most of history, and I think a lot of people's affinity for gold has to do with the history that we have with it. It's just a long history, 5,000 years or so, of use of gold as coinage. But the very earliest money was cattle. Cows, goats, sheep were considered money. Here's a quote from Carl Menger. Their marketability extended literally to all economizing individuals. The lack of artificial roads, combined with the fact that cattle transported themselves almost without cost in the primitive stages of civilization, made them saleable over a wider geographical area than most commodities. So you could get your cows or your sheep or your herds, you could get them someplace. That was key. A number of circumstances, moreover, favored broad quantitative and temporal consideration or limits to their marketability. A cow is a commodity of considerable durability. Cows live pretty long, and they're durable. Its cost of maintenance is almost nothing when pastures are available in abundance, where the animals are kept under the open sky. You don't need a barn. You keep your cows in the field. They graze. So it wasn't costly to have money. In a culture where everybody attempted to possess as large a herd as possible, cattle are usually not brought to the market in excessive quantities at one time. In the period of which I'm speaking, there was no similar juncture of circumstances establishing as broad a range of marketability for any other commodity. If we add to these circumstances the fact that trade in domestic animals was at least as well developed as trade in any other commodity, cattle appear to have been the most saleable of all available commodities, and hence the natural money of the peoples of the ancient world. So cattle served as money. Abraham was a very wealthy man. Yes, he had gold and silver, but he had large herds. That made him wealthy because he had a lot of money out in the field. That's what it was. The words pecuniary, which is something we use still, and fee, they're both words derived from the word cattle. Pecunia is a Latin term for money, and it's derived from pecus, meaning cattle. And the Anglo-Saxon word for feo, which is where we get fee, means both money and cattle. So we see that there's still some vestiges of cattle money in our language. Here's a story from Genesis 47. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." What do we see here? What we see is that the value of money was worthless in relationship to grain. What was more important? What was the most saleable, valuable, tradable commodity in that economy? Was grain, because people were starving to death. So the food was the money in that particular situation. The crisis had changed their scale of priorities, their values. This is something we talked about in week 1. So that they imputed more value to grain than they did to silver and gold. Imputation of value comes into play. The money is worth what people think it is. Can't stress that enough. At times, people think that gold is worth a lot. Other times, they think grain is worth more. In prison camps during World War II, the prisoners used cigarettes as money. They traded things because that was what they had. They didn't have coins, they had cigarettes, and they traded cigarettes and pieces of cigarettes for other things. So, here's where we get to the gold and why gold is vital. Why gold serves so well, why silver serves so well. These characteristics are most often associated with what passes for money. It's durable, that is, it doesn't die, rust, or otherwise deteriorate. Now, cows live a long time, but cows die, so there's a problem sometimes with cows is durability. Transportability, they're movable from the location of exchange. So if we trade here, if I trade a spearhead for the cup of coffee, okay, I can take my spearhead with me, so it's transportable. There were examples in history of islanders. There's an island in the South Pacific called Yap, Y-A-P. And the Yap people use stones that are so big that you can't move them. I mean, they weigh tons and tons and tons. Nobody knows even how they got them there because they're not natural to the island. And it's a little island, and they had canoes. How'd they get these stones there? We don't know. But that's why they were scarce, right? But they weren't transportable. Uniformity. Money is uniform. It's always the same quality, and it's easily recognized. It's divisible. It can be made into large or small units. Well, you can't do that with cattle. You can't do that with the big stones. I mean, you can make it into small stones, but then it loses its scarcity. So, and it's scarce. It can't be counterfeited or faked. We can't manufacture gold. There's only one way to get gold. You dig out the ore, you smelt it, you melt the gold out of the ore, and you make it into coins or bars. That's it. So why do gold and silver work so well as money? Because they're durable, they're transportable, they're uniform, they're divisible, and they're scarce. Gold will not rust. Silver will tarnish. But gold is pretty much inert. It just sits there and shines. When you find a gold coin on the bottom of the ocean after 100 years of being sunk in a Spanish galleon, it still shines when you uncover it. Silver is going to be, tarnished, and so that'll be a little bit different. So far, we understand this lesson. I mean, we kind of get this. Precious metals work for money, but we get confused by the Federal Reserve. We get confused by paper money. We get confused by inflation. Why is it so confusing? How did money devolve from real stuff like cattle and coins into paper notes? What about inflation and deflation? Why are we so confused about all this? If money has historically had 5 characteristics of durability, transportability, uniformity, divisibility, and scarcity, why do we have paper money? It's not any of it. Well, it's not scarce. It's not necessarily uniform. It is transportable, but it's not durable. I mean, why do we have paper money? And here's how it happened. There have been several times when several instances in history where paper money was very, very prevalent. This is one of them. We're going to discuss how it happened in Western civilization. As economies developed in Europe during the Middle Ages, the division of labor got better and better, and merchants were getting wealthy. And so they got so wealthy that they couldn't keep all their coins. They had coins. That's what money was. They didn't have paper money. They had coins. It was too much to keep under your bed. It's lumpy, it's hard, it's very uncomfortable. And it's not safe. It's not safe at home. So what do? Where would the money be safe? It's going to be safe in a safe. And where were the best safes? For obvious reasons, the best safes were at the goldsmiths, at the jeweler. He had the best safes because he had all this gold. He had the silver that he was making jewelry out of. And so what he would do is he would rent space in his safe. And so the good businessmen who were accumulating all the coins would take their coins to the goldsmith and put it in his safe, and he would give them a slip of paper, a note that said, hey, your gold is in my safe. So that's how it happened. He provided a record of the ownership in his safe with a piece of paper. It was just a note that said how much was on deposit. Issuance of notes and depositors. We're starting to hear banking terms. So here's how paper money happened. The gold was in storage, and using it in a transaction was a nuisance. If you wanted to trade with your gold, now you took your piece of paper, you went to the goldsmith and said, I have these coins in your safe. You give him the note, he gives you the coins. Now you take your coins and you go over here and you buy the stuff that you want, you trade with it, you make a couple of more. Now instead of have 2, you have 5. You take them back to the goldsmith, you put them in his safe, and he gives you a note. Well, that's pretty inconvenient. That's a lot of back and forth and travel. And it was a pain in the neck. You got to carry the coins. You got to transport the coins. You got to transport the notes. You got to keep the notes safe. So, wouldn't it be easier to buy something with the paper note itself? And the answer, of course, is yes. So that's how people started trading with paper money. They started trading the notes that said, hey, here's a note that says my coins are on deposit at Joe Smith's safe. Will you take the note? And people started taking them. They imputed value to the notes. So what happened is that people started thinking of the paper notes as if they're money. And by thinking that, they're imputing value to them, and all of a sudden they became money. Because they're a medium of exchange, they're being used to facilitate trade. So that's where paper money comes from. That's how it happened. And theoretically, when the United States took all the gold in 1933, they took everybody's gold coins, melted them down into bars, put them in Fort Knox, and issued paper. The paper said, hey, it's all right, the gold is on deposit in the safe. And everybody was happy with that. And all of a sudden, remember we said in the Depression, during the Great Depression, there was no money. Well, now we started putting money out into the economy. Paper money. Now we're going to transition from that kind of banking to fractional reserve banking. Most advocates of sound money don't have any problem with what we just described. You have put your money on deposit in somebody's safe, you get a note, you trade it. That's 100% reserve banking. It's called 100% reserve because the specie, and it's still called specie, whether it be a Holstein, a Guernsey, or gold or silver, the specie is on deposit someplace. It's on reserve in somebody's safe. So if 100% reserve currency means that all of the gold or silver is on deposit, how much do you think is on deposit in a fractional reserve? Fraction, okay, top of the class. A fraction is on reserve. So what happened was the goldsmiths figured out that that money, the gold, the coins, was just sitting in their bank. Nobody ever came back for it anymore. They were just trading the notes. And so what they were concerned with was issuing paper that was more durable, that would last a little bit longer, that wasn't easily counterfeited, that had their signatures on it and maybe a gold stamp or some such thing. But they were more concerned about the paper than they were about worrying about how to trade this in and out. But because this is always just sitting there, unless maybe the merchant was moving to a different city, it was all just sitting there, it's gathering dust, and it wasn't doing anything. But there was an opportunity there. because what they could do was they could write more paper. They could write more notes and say, we have on deposit more gold, even though they didn't have the gold. So what was happening was, in circulation, you have the paper notes saying, this is on deposit. Come and get it whenever you want it. And as long as they didn't issue too many notes, they could always redeem the notes. So how many notes can you get away with issuing? And that's a whole other discussion. It works out to about 40% is always a safe amount if you have 40% reserve. Right. So if you have $1 million in notes, if you have 400,000 in specie, that'll about work out. That's the way it worked out in the independent banking era in the 1800s, and it worked well. Although there's a problem with that. What's the problem? The paper notes are additional claims on stuff that's not there. It's a fraud. It violates God's laws. So there are more notes in circulation than there's gold in the vault, and what happened is that's what inflation is. We inflated the supply of paper money over what's actually available in gold. So that's what inflation is when there's more money issued than there are goods on deposit. We have the moral problem because in a fractional reserve banking system, there are always more claims on the money than there is on deposit. So each fractional reserve note breaks a handful of the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not have any gods before me. Inflation is an attempt to be God, creating money out of nothing. Thou shalt not bow down to idols. Inflation is a result of man's greed, and greed is, in Colossians, is equated to idolatry. So we have that. Thou shalt not steal. Inflation trades something of no value for goods of value. That goldsmith wrote up a piece of paper and said, I have 10 gold coins on deposit. He spent it as if there were. He just made it up out of nothing. He stole something from somebody by giving them a note that said, you can come and get 10 coins. The 10 coins aren't there. Inflation is lying about the value of money, and coveting may not cause inflation, but it certainly supports and accelerates it once it's underway. In the U.S., you can make a case for violating the third commandment because we have God's name all over our dishonest money. In God we trust, right? So, fractional reserve banking is inherently inflationary. It violates God's commandments. That's what we have in this country. I'm going to blow through this. The idea of inflation, it's just an example. Inflation is not actually, inflation is not rising prices. Inflation is a symptom. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation, okay? It's just like a failed crop of oranges is going to cause supply to dramatically decrease. And the laws of supply and demand would then naturally cause those prices to increase. But that's not inflation. That's just supply and demand. Joel.
You know these people do know what it is, but they don't want to say. Because the increase in supply of oil, for example, has forced the price way down. Nobody's calling it deflation. But if the prices go up,
they call it inflation.
They do that.
Yes.
And they properly don't call it deflation.
Right, it's supply, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's right. When you say these people, you're talking about our government.
Yeah.
The people who make these proclamations, yes.
Yeah.
But people in the general economy will call it inflation and deflation. And they do. They mix it up.
That's what I'm trying to disabuse anybody here about the notions of what inflation is. Inflation is an increase in the money supply, and that's it. It's simply a monetary event. That's all that inflation is. We had inflation in this country in 1849. You've heard of this, the 49ers, right? San Francisco has a football team named the 49ers because people flocked to California in 1849 because gold was discovered in California. And a lot of gold was discovered in California. And what it did is it massively increased the money supply. And so prices went up because there was a lot more money floating around in circulation. That was truly inflation, but over time that evened out because gold is still scarce and it's not easy to get out of the ground. So imagine a static island economy. The island has 100 cooking kettles and 100 pieces of silver, and that's it. So 1 to 1. What's the kettle priced in? The kettle is priced at 1 piece of silver to 1 kettle. Or you could say the silver is priced in kettles. The silver is priced 1 kettle per piece of silver. But if 100 more pieces of silver washed up on shore, now you have 200 pieces of silver, you still only have 100 kettles. What's the price of a kettle? Well, it's 2 pieces of silver. That's inflation. The money supply was inflated. Is the value of the kettle any more than it was before the silver washed up on shore? The answer is no. And so we don't really have an increase in value, but what we do is we have a change in prices, and the prices have changed because the value of the money has gone down. So that's what's going on. That's a perfect example of, or illustration for inflation. So the same thing happens in our economy today. With paper money, if we flood more paper money in, prices will go up, but it's because the value of the money is going down, and that's it. That's the only reason. Inflation is infectious. We get used to it, and it infects our thinking. And we're going to talk about this a lot more when we go through debt. I don't know if that's next week or the week after, but inflation is infectious. We go back to the ancient times, and the gold or silver refiner added stuff, impurities to his silver or gold, and passed it off as 100%. He'd be cheating. He'd also be inflating because he has extra gold and silver left over, right? To profit from the theft, he needs to sell that extra metal into the economy, and that's going to increase the money supply, and prices are going to go up. So the supply increases, the supply of money, the prices go down in response to that. There's a lot of sand. It's cheap. If silver becomes like sand, things are going to get very, very expensive in terms of silver. Silver items become too plentiful, its value drops. Remember, Solomon made silver so plentiful it was as stones. People didn't even bother to pick it up in Solomon's day. Who gets hurt in an inflationary scenario? Well, the first customers get hurt because they bought at face value, right? They buy thinking that they're getting the same value. But if they resell things fairly quickly before the extent of the devaluation is understood, they'll get hurt less. And so the faster, as we have inflation, we get a thing called velocity of money picking up. Because it's a hot potato. You want to get rid of it before it loses more value. And so it becomes a real problem. The winners are those who get the full value for the base goods earliest in the cycle, and the losers are those who aren't trading early in the cycle. And who do those tend to be? That's savers, people who don't spend a lot, just have their money. Yes?
I was listening to a professor one time who argued that small inflation is a good thing for an economy because maybe like 3% or something like that. If you have too much, obviously things fall apart, but if you have like maybe 3%, what it does is it tends to transfer money out of non-liquid situations like a saver to places where it's being spent. And of course, so it encourages more transactions, which increases the value of the economy.
Okay, and that argument is still prevalent today, and that's the Fed's argument. They're targeting 2 to 3% inflation. The argument there, however, is that savings are bad. The argument is that consumption is good and savings are bad. That it'll move money out of the savings and into consumption. People will spend it and thus increase the economy. Whereas, if the money is saved, it's available for productive use. Savings get used to invest in capital goods. Savings are used for more production and innovation and things like that. Now that's what you're going to do is by encouraging the consumption, you're hampering the savings, and now you don't have as much in your economy available for investment in goods or in capital goods and in improvements.
You would argue that it doesn't actually help growth.
No, I would argue that inflation is inherently evil. That happens. The scarcity of gold is such that it's scarce, but not so scarce that the increase in the gold won't mirror the increase in the goods being produced in your economy. But if the gold production doesn't keep up with the production of goods what you'll have is slowly decreasing prices. The prices will slowly over time become lower because the money supply isn't keeping up with the production of goods. If it keeps up with the production of goods, then your goods are more or less going to stay priced the same. You'll have very stable prices. But during the 1800s in this country, we had slowly decreasing prices for our manufactured goods because it was just a matter of the money supply barely keeping up with production. And production was really ramping up in the 1800s in the United States. The market was being flooded with new and innovative goods. Why? Because there were savings and people were investing in their businesses from their savings and producing new and innovative products. The number of kettles in our island was becoming more and more and more. So as those kettles became more and more and more, and the money supply didn't keep up with that, the prices were slowly drifting down. That's a good thing. And the more production we have and the more innovation we have, the better off as people we will be. So it's always look at the other side of that. Yeah, we need to move these savings out of the savings accounts. People are hoarding money. That was the claim in the Depression. We have to stop people from hoarding their gold. That's why we have to make it illegal. That's why everybody has to go and turn their gold in, because it's evil to hoard. And they sold to people, and people lined up and turned their money in. It's beyond comprehension, but that's what happened.
Scams everywhere.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go.
Is there a link between the inflation thing and population? In other words, if everybody in here was given $1 million, but if there's only $3 in circulation, and there's 15 of us here, you know what I mean? Is there a...
You get into the divisibility of the money. Remember we talked about that it needs to be easily divisible. And so, no, it doesn't have to be people. That's a fallacy that people use all the time. There has to be, there would need to be too much gold if we were to go to a gold standard economy. And no, you just divide it into smaller fractions. That's all. And the day-to-day transactions we used silver for. Gold was used to store value because it's so valuable in such a small piece. Joe.
Yeah, Conrad's illustration right there is what most people buy into. The Fed, he said 2-3% inflation.
We need a government who is going to manage our money supply.
Right, for us.
Right.
And you know, I would say most people I run into have bought into that.
Every free market economist in every school will say the command economies of the USSR were ridiculous.
How on earth is the USSR going to know how many shoes that need to be made, in what sizes, in what colors? It obviously can't work. And not one of them will fight against the Federal Reserve doing exactly the same thing, saying, oh, we know exactly how much money there should be, and we know exactly what the interest rate should be, and we're going to set those things.
See, the thing that intrigues me about this is, once again, going back to the Bible, a book of the way things are supposed to be, principles, if you will. Economists, I think, love to get away from principles because that allows them to like tinker with things and like how much and so forth. And maybe if Conrad's illustration is correct, then Weimar was a good thing, because if inflation is going to give us more transactions, Weimar inflation gave transactions all the time.
You had plenty of transactions, but it certainly didn't work very well. It's a social phenomenon, and economists want it to be a spreadsheet. They want it to be a formula. It's scientific.
It'd be very interesting to know. I mean, silver has a value of a lot more than $1 today. And
Per ounce.
gold is 1,000 an ounce. It'd be interesting to see what that would actually look like if we could start trading with it. Very interesting.
It will be. It will be. And- oh,
I was just going to throw out something I always thought was interesting, and it really addresses that. You go back through history, the silver dollar buys a steak dinner, and a 1 ounce gold piece buys a fine men's suit, in rough terms. But you go to any time in U.S. history, and
That's
silver
true.
do- you can go now and buy a silver dollar for about $20. It's a steak dinner. Go back 50 years, go back 100 years, go back 200, your silver dollar's worth a steak dinner.
But if we all had to start trading in that, I mean, chances are $1 silver is going to be.
Well, I don't know. It has held true over vastly swinging populations and
They'd have to give the silver back.
I can't fully explain it. I don't understand about it, but that's just a fact.
yeah.
A little while ago, I saw that happen. A guy, I don't know if he was even allowed to do it, but he advertised 1960, he was selling, he had a gas station. He advertised 1960 gas prices.
Yes,
If you paid in 1960
60 quarters.
money.
A quarter a gallon.
Yeah, exactly, a quarter gallon, same thing. The gas prices essentially stayed the same.
A silver quarter still buys a gallon of gas.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
That's pretty interesting.
We are now. If the losers aren't protected, if the losers in an inflationary scenario are not protected by authorities, it's a sign of moral corruption. The impurities in gold and silver are called dross. Isaiah 1:22. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Are we not inflating the wine supply by adding water to our wine? It's inflation. And it's a sign of, and Isaiah was talking about not inflation, he was talking about moral corruption here. It's an imagery for sin. God's warned us about that. There's a relationship between moral corruption as a nation, morally corrupt government, and debased currencies. We accept it here. We have the government we want here. God requires the government to enforce the honest weights and measures. When it doesn't, or actually becomes the cheater or the protector of the cheater, you have public corruption on display. And if the citizens accept this, or to the extent that they accept it, it's an indication of corruption society-wide. And where we see corrupted money, we see widespread complaint on the part of people. Without widespread complaint on the part of people, we see corrupted people. And why is it so prevalent? And why does the winemaker water his wine? And why don't people stop using dishonest vendors and dishonest money? Because it's a monopoly. It's required to be used. You have to use Federal Reserve notes in this economy. It's, Dan.
The wine market we were talking about.
Yes.
Okay. If that resulted in downfall of their economy,
Yes.
starvation and horrible times, have we not repeated that exact scenario, even more so, in our own economy?
Yes, over a slower period of time.
Hasn't the inflation exceeded that?
It's since, not quite exceeded it, but since the installation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the dollar has lost over 98 or 99% of its value. Yes. Yes.
From
But-
our perspective, it seems like we have it seems like it's working.
Yes.
It doesn't look anything like one.
Because in Weimar it happened over a span of 2 years, and here it's happened over the span of 105. And the slow drip, drip, drip of inflation, it has just inoculated people to some extent.
Do you think the slow drip drip will yield the same exact result?
Yes, it will, because we'll get to that with the debt. Because inflation and debt are linked at the hip. They are. It's 10 after. I gotta quit here. Yeah, because I still have 20 slides. So
when Joel said 5 after 11, and I knew we were doomed. So, yeah, we'll try to, we'll wrap this up the next time. But we got to go. So, we're dismissed. Sorry.